Hello everyone, and happy 2023. This video is on the recent report composed by me about Redstone Awards 2022, hosted by CraftyMasterman. He examines the accuracy of representing Redstone skill sets while responding to the criticisms of the show and gives recommendations for improvements. The link to the document is in the description below. This video acts as a supplement to the report, where I can talk about things I cannot cover within the report and briefly summarize some important ideas of the report. The reason for writing this report is because while the show attracted numerous people who participated in the nominations and voting for the best Redstoners in their respective categories, some people who specialize in the categories criticized that the show is a popularity contest and not representative, saying that the nominees win due to their fame, not their skills and abilities. Meanwhile, others question if Crafty himself made any errors during the show. For the people who just want quick and short answers from the data analysis, we can conclude that the show is partially popularity driven. Yet, there are certain degrees of representation. There are also some errors found during different stages of the show, which I'll explain more about later. In the following, I'll first talk about the methods and techniques of data analysis that I didn't get to cover in the report. Then I'll briefly summarize the key points in sections 4 and 5, and end the video with my personal comments and reflection. Before we start doing data analysis, we want to sort out the data we have. One interesting data set is the one I acquired from Purple's, which is separated into piston doors and other categories. As Purple did his research by allowing each response to give 1 to 3 nominations, there are more nominations than responses. For example, in the Observador category, there are 39 responses and 85 nominations. Hence, we can generate 2 useful statistics for analysis. Let's use me as an example. The third column is calculated by the number of nominations I received divided by the total number of nominations, which here is 12 divided by 85. While the fourth column is calculated by the number of nominations I received divided by the total number of responses, which here is 12 divided by 39. I use the figures from the fourth column since it represents the approval percentage. For other categories, we don't have any numbers to analyze, since Purple decided on the best Redstoner based on interviews. However, this doesn't mean we can't get useful information from it. One method we can use is to use an indicator function. Here, I've defined the function value to be 1 if the person wins the best Redstoner in the category and 0 otherwise. So for a Slimestoner category, Mythical Pengu gets 1 while XYOR gets 0. This indicator function is also useful on other occasions as well. For example, I need to examine if the host bias exists. So I had a Crafty indicator that gives 1 if the Redstoner is Crafty and 0 otherwise. The data obtained can be transformed into many useful statistics, and there are many ways to do it. So you can have different numbers from me, even when we have the same datasets. Now we have converted the datasets into useful statistics. We can start performing the analysis. The way I will do it is by using multiple linear regression, although this is not the only way to analyze. For multiple linear regression, there are 2 things to formulate. First is the correlation table, and second is the regression models. The correlation table checks the correlation between 2 variables, while the regression models check if the independent variables can predict the dependent variable. I'll talk about how I approach the analysis while assuming none of you has a statistics background. But please don't take this as if I'm teaching you, as I'm nowhere near a statistics teacher. You should consider this as my sharing of how I did my analysis instead. Let me define something first: the strength of correlation or model or predictor. You will later see some statistics, such as correlation coefficients or p-values or standardized coefficients. The values of these statistics determine the strength, which I'll explain when we get there. For now, just remember that less than 0.4 means weak, from 0.4 to less than 0.7 means moderate, and 0.7 or up means strong. Note that these are in absolute value terms. You can have alternative ranges, but this is what I will use throughout the reports. Now let me talk about multi-collinearity. Multi-collinearity means there's a high correlation between two independent variables. When I encounter this, I'll eliminate the variable with less correlation with the dependent variable. Let's use the correlation table from section 3.2.1 as an example. We see that there is a high correlation between purpose nomination and private form percentage, 0.783, and between log subscriber counts and log view counts, 0.985, highlighted in red. Then we check the correlation between the dependent variable, public form percentage. The correlation coefficient for purpose nomination is 0.426, while for private form percentage is 0.348. So we eliminate private form percentage. While the correlation coefficient for log subscriber count is 0.451, and for log view count is 0.413. So we eliminate log view counts. Now to regression. At the beginning of each model, you see something like this, which mentioned adjusted R squared. Its close neighbor is R squared. Both show the percentage of variance explained, but when to use them. If you only have one independent variable, then you would use R squared. And if you have more than one independent variable, then you would use adjusted R squared. Since all of the regression models I presented are multiple linear regression, not simple linear regression, I'll use adjusted R squared throughout. Next, let me define what I mean by statistically significant. We simply look at the p-value and see if it's less than 0.05. If the value is greater than 0.05, we say it is not statistically significant, and it's different from saying statistically insignificant. You can replace 0.05 with other small numbers, but this is what I'll be using. P-value checks if the regression models or independent variables are statistically significant. Let's use model 1 from section 3.2.2.1 for illustration. If we look at the p-value from table 2, we see it is less than 0.05. In fact, very close to 0. So we say the model is statistically significant. Now for the p-values in table 3, if we look at Crafty indicator, it has a p-value of 0.108, which is greater than 0.05, so it is not statistically significant. Meanwhile, both purpose nomination and log subscriber count have p-values close to 0, so they are statistically significant. Now you might think, what do we do with the independent variables that are not statistically significant? Well, similar to how we deal with multi-collinearity, we eliminate the independent variables and run regression again, looping the process until we see no independent variables that are not statistically significant. Then we compare the regression models with the highest R squared or adjusted R squared values, which I've mentioned which one to use earlier. One important thing about regression is that we can see if the independent variables can predict the dependent variable, which can be seen from the unstandardized and standardized coefficients. But what are the differences between them? Well, unstandardized coefficients are useful for formulating the regression equation, while standardized coefficients are useful to measure and compare the predictivity of independent variables. To calculate the standardized coefficient, we take the unstandardized coefficient, multiply it by the standard deviation of the independent variable, and divide it by the standard deviation of the dependent variable. If we take model 1 again, we see that the unstandardized coefficients help us to construct the regression equation, which is helpful to predict any extra data not considered within the data analyzed. Meanwhile, we will consider the standardized coefficients from statistically significant independent variables. So here, Crafty indicator is not considered. If we take a look at the beta values, we see that purpose nomination and log subscriber counts are moderate predictors of public form percentage. And since the values differ very little, we can say the predicting ability of purpose nomination and log subscriber counts are similar. That's all for the data analysis. I'll go on and briefly summarize sections 4 and 5. Section 4 is about responding to the criticisms based on the data analysis we did and detecting if there are any errors committed. For public nominations, we can refer to Model 1 Table 3 and see that the p-value of Crafty indicator is higher than 0.05, so we can ignore it. We can conclude from the beta values that public forum percentage is affected by both professional judgments and popularity about equally, since 0.593 is approximately equal to 0.576. For voting results, we can refer to Model 3 Table 8 and see that Purpler's nomination and Crafty indicator are not statistically significant due to their p-values greater than 0.05. The remaining variables are log subscriber counts, which is a weak predictor, and public forum percentage, which is a moderate predictor. Since we established that public forum percentage is partially affected by popularity of nominees and that log subscriber count is mainly affected by popularity, we can conclude that the voting results are affected mainly by popularity, although the effects from professional judgments still exist, but is not that significant. As Crafty decided to veto some votes, we'll see how the veto process changes the vote results. We refer to Model 5 Table 13 and see that private forum percentage is not statistically significant and that public forum percentage still remains a moderate predictor. However, log subscriber count is no longer a predictor of the model, meaning that the veto process partially eliminates the popularity vector, restoring some degree of balance between the popularity of nominees and professional judgments. For host bias, from Models 2 and 4, Tables 5 and 10, we see that Crafty indicator is not statistically significant in both regression models, so no host bias is found. However, as Crafty is also statistically famous, the impact of him might be from his popularity instead. Now we look at the errors committed within the show. There are multiple minor errors made during data processing, particularly the cleaning from public nominations. Let's take a look at the observador category, for example. The error can be detected by just simply running a simple Python program, in which we see the numbers understate the actual figures, which are shown here. Although these errors are made, they do not affect the results of public nominations. What does affect the results of public nominations is the inconsistency of criteria imposed by Crafty himself. A good example is shown here in the best zero-tick redstone category. We see that Purpler's has 26 votes, while Ilmango has only 16. Yet, Ilmango is chosen as the nominee, even when Purple clearly has a solid background in 06. Another example is the Code Digger category. Mystic Cat is chosen as the nominee, which, according to Crafty's criteria, only people who are within the category should be chosen. While Mystic Cat works with command blocks and coding, he has no contribution to code digging, so he should not be chosen. We can see through the examples that the criteria are not followed strictly, hence the inconsistency, and we can define this as a major error. We'll leave the criticisms and move on to recommendations. The first recommendation says veto when necessary, which Crafty has done. This is because we see from the voting results that popularity is a main factor for nominees winning, plus that 4 out of 11 categories have nominees from public nominations getting the most votes, shown in red and in brackets, in which most of them have high fame. Not to mention, the other nominees also get higher votes even when they did not win the category. Hence, the veto process is necessary when most of the public doesn't cast rational votes, and is shown earlier to be effective in restoring professional judgments. The second recommendation is to use preferential voting. This is because for the most popular voting system, when the veto process is applied, the people who had the first preference voted for the disqualified nominee lost representation. This is the same for people who cast their first preference vote for lower-ranked nominees. Preferential voting gives voters a chance to choose alternatives when their first preference didn't win, thus increasing representation. The third recommendation is to apply weighting based on which category the voter belongs to. This is because people who are in the field have a deeper knowledge in the category, hence weighting system adds professional representation. The fourth recommendation is to allow blank votes. This is because when people are forced to vote in unfamiliar categories, they would cast their votes randomly, which adds randomness and decreases the accuracy of the voting results. Allowing blank votes gives a better representation as the randomness is mostly eliminated. The fifth recommendation is to allow third-party supervision and assistance. There are two benefits to this. First is reduce errors, which we see that Crafty has committed some minor errors and major errors throughout the show, and shows the importance of third-party involvement. Second is increased transparency. People have often questioned how the show operates behind the scenes and whether they should trust the show results, which is due to the lack of transparency. Allowing the involvement of third party can resolve the issue effectively. The sixth recommendation is to eliminate repetitive voting or nominations. The questionnaires made by Crafty do not include ways to prevent people from filling them repetitively, which can skew results. One solution is to force people to provide a valid email address, such that the marginal cost of repetitive voting increases and most often is higher than the marginal benefit. Hence, repetitive voting or nominating would be mostly eliminated. Some may argue that not all people have email addresses and other privacy issues, but every policy comes with some compromises, and implementing this policy has benefits that outweigh the drawbacks. The last recommendation is to maintain balance between public involvement and representation accuracy. This is because public involvement attracts views, which is important for public recognition, while representation accuracy gives value and reputation to the show and the host through the approval of professionals. The ways have been mainly introduced in sections 5.1 and 5.3. If you're interested in looking at the resources, whether the documents or the data, you can find all of them in the description below. So you can follow the document link or the regression link or the data folder link for Redstone Awards 2022. Moreover, if you want to perform data analysis, you can do it yourself actually. Follow the link for installing Excel Analysis Toolpack. Then start your analysis by pressing the Data tab, then click Data Analysis, which is on the right side of the toolbar on top. Using Model 1 as an example, you want to perform a correlation test with the worksheet called Claimed and input the following as shown. And for the regression models, perform it in the worksheet called Cleaned No VP and input the following as shown. The methods and techniques have been mostly covered in this video, so rewatch if you need detailed instructions. Now I've finished summarizing the report. I want to say a few words before I end the video, while I play the video of the theater curtain working. Just a side note, although many participated in the show, hardly anyone knows who built this curtain, which is me actually. I'm also responsible for building some contraptions in the Synergy Awards 2020 as well. So I've been working for the shows all along while no one notices. Anyways, back to the report. Although this report does give some criticism of the show, that is not the thing I want to encourage. I've seen some personal criticisms directed at Crafty himself, saying he organized the show just to gain views, which is just mean and controversial, because aren't all content creators doing the exact thing? Saying the show is a popularity contest isn't fair either without objective materials to refer from, which is why I've written this entire report dedicated to that. I think not enough people recognize the demanding hard work that Crafty has committed to this show, which I experienced this just from the mass data processing required. We really owe him a big thank you for hosting. What I hope you learned from this video is the spirit to be as objective as possible, and some techniques for data analysis. The spirit of being objective is also why I would defend the host when the criticisms are unfair to him, but at the same time support the criticisms when the numbers support the claims. And all people make mistakes, including myself and Crafty. What's important at the end is that we learn from our errors and fix them, which is why the recommendation section is essential. Now to answer some potential questions directed to me. Do I write this report because I'm salty about not winning the show? Well, no. I plan on doing the analysis a week before the show. In addition, Lum and I mutually agreed that it's either me or him, and no matter who wins, we will be happy for each other. I still remember the experiences from creating his first 5x5 together to watching him going for speedy 5x5s in restricted size. That acceleration in knowledge accumulation is definitely something even I never achieved. So he definitely deserves the award and recognition. Lastly, I would like to thank you to those who participated in the show, whether you supported me or not, and I hope you like this alternative content. Let me know if you want more videos of me explaining and summarizing my Redstone essays, and thank you for watching.